Welcome to this panel discussion designed to help people with chronic fatigue conditions such as long COVID and ME/CFS understand a bit more about what might be happening and, more importantly, what they might be able to do to recover. And tonight we're going to be talking specifically about the symptom of fatigue. The symptom that can carry on long after an initial infection, the kind of fatigue that just stops you in your tracks and makes, even simple daily tasks feel completely impossible. Sometimes persistent or following a sort of relapsing remittance pattern. My name's Rachel. I'm the chair of the consumer arm of COFFI, and COFFI are a collaboration of scientists who research fatigue following infections. And I had long COVID myself, and certainly for me, fatigue was the hardest part. And it was made worse by a really frightening narrative of having a body that responded like a broken battery and having to be told to carefully manage my energy, which I later found out was one of the most unhelpful hypotheses in this field. And tonight we'll explore a different understanding about causes and paths to recovery, an understanding that is helping many people to recover. And we'll look at some evidence to support this. And we will hear from people with lived experience who've recovered, as well as experts studying fatigue from the perspectives of neuroscience and also from clinical psychology. And I'm really excited to introduce you to the panel. And I'm going to start with Louise McCallan. And Louise recovered from ME/CFS and chronic pain, 8 years of having that. She's now a mind-body coach. She's a TEDx speaker and speaks at many different events. And she's also a patient advocate. So I'm really excited to hear Louise talk. I'm also really excited to introduce you to Katy McGee. And Katy also recovered from ME/CFS, and she's the founder of the Recovery Hub, which is a website and some other tools that provide really extensive information and support for people that are recovering from these conditions. We've also got Per Brodel, who's a neuroscientist at Oslo University, and he's spent his career bridging the gap between neuroscience and clinical medicine. He's written a textbook called The Central Nervous System, which is a classic textbook published by Oxford University Press. And more recently, he's become really interested in conditions such as fibromyalgia and the chronic fatigue syndrome, and looking at that in light of recent research. And then lastly, we've got Jake Hollis. And Jake is a clinical psychologist. He specialises in ME/CFS and long COVID. He's got lived experience because he recovered himself. He writes for Psychology Today, and he uses neuroscience and psychoimmunology, I've got to get that right, alongside emotion-focused psychotherapy in his work. And so we'll hear from Jake in terms of how he helps people recover. But I want to start really from the patient experience. And I'm really keen to firstly find out from Louise and then Katy, particularly in terms of your experience of fatigue. What was it like? How did it come on? What were maybe some of the worst moments? And I'm also interested in what did you believe was happening at the time? And Louise, just to start with yourself, what happened for your own journey?
Yeah, thank you. I always say my fatigue was like having wading through treacle, having the flu, having an elephant sitting on my chest, like all of those things. It was really a sensation that was completely unlike tiredness. So it wasn't something that I'd actually experienced before and could relate to. And for me, it came on kind of gradually. So I was busy, I was I was a busy primary school teacher. I had bits and bobs of stress in my life, but I didn't really sort of see myself as being a stressed person. And this fatigue kind of started where it would just feel like this heaviness. And I was able to still go to work, But then in the evenings, I would be completely crashed out. And I just thought, oh, well, I'm a bit tired. But I'd be waking up in the morning feeling completely unrefreshed, like I hadn't actually been asleep at all. And this kind of went on for a period of time. So I would push myself to go to work. And then in the evening again, come and crash, no hobbies, no, all of that peripheral stuff kind of fell away until I was just going to work and then coming home and basically resting in my bed.
Louise, that just sounds horrendous. And what did you believe at the time? Did you have any thoughts in terms of what was causing it?
Yeah, I went through this cycle of kind of going backwards and forwards to the doctors during that time and having all sorts of kind of blood tests. And I really felt like, was it hormonal? Or maybe I had, a vitamin deficiency, or maybe an adrenal thing, or, so I was getting these tests. Maybe I was diabetic. So I would have this kind of shaky feeling that would come on. And when I was at work, I would have to leave the classroom. It would just kind of come on, and I would go into the staff room quietly, and I would always eat a biscuit. And I somehow in my mind thought maybe it was a diabetic thing because I would eat a biscuit and feel a wee bit better. And so I had all these tests, and it actually concluded in me. I pushed through and pushed through for months until it actually just concluded in me collapsing at work and ending up in hospital and going into this very severe kind of stage of fatigue. And so yeah, there was really that feeling like something's going on in my body. What
Yeah.
is it? And then that quest to kind of find out what it was. But then all these things were coming back as being okay. So yeah, it was just very perplexing actually, and very worrying, because it just seemed to be, getting worse and worse.
And this went on for years as well. Katie, as Louise was talking, I mean, you were just nodding. So is that a very similar experience um, for
So
you?
similar. It was the constantly looking for biological answers. That was the same for me. I remember throwing out all of the pots and pans in the house because I thought it was chemicals. Replacing all of the cleaning products with more ecological ones. It never for a second would I have pinpointed my incredibly stressful life. It never for a second. So yeah, I was looking same as Louise. Is this hormonal? Is it about sugar? Um, and that went on for a good year and a half, and a lot of fear. I found the symptoms incredibly scary because there were no answers to be found. Um, and similarly, had a very stressful job. So I was working as a TV producer. Everyone around me was stressed all the time. Everyone around me was pushing themselves really, really hard. And it was just me that was getting sick. So, yeah, it was hard to watch everyone continue their exciting life, pushing them, burning the candle at both ends, and I'm not able to keep up. So there was a lot of fear.
And what did you think at the time? Did you just thought it was some biological thing that but you hadn't discovered it yet? Were the tests coming back normal, Katie?
Every single test. I mean, I can't remember what point I got to, how many years in, but I just refused any more blood tests. Because it was just endlessly upsetting. Having absolutely no answers. But no, I had no clue what it was. I was constantly, at one point I did 3 months of, I think it's chlorophyll. Have I got the wrong word? No, it's like a green um herb that you take that can clear chemicals out of your body. I saw a nutritionist and I did multiple diets. Um, Eliminating foods. I thought maybe it was because of some sort of an intolerance. I thought maybe my body had some sort of an imbalance that needed to be corrected with diet. I thought maybe it was a gut dysbiosis, leaky gut. I got heavily into researching that, but I had no idea. It was just a constant detective work.
Yeah, it literally sounds like you, between you, went down every single avenue in that desperation to change something. And as you say, if everybody else around you is stressed and they're okay, why would you think that? Per, I'd love to come to you and find out a bit more about, from your kind of perspective and understanding a bit more in terms of the science, what do you
Hmm.
think is going on here?
Well, I may start by just stressing that fatigue is a feeling, and as pain and fear, and that's obvious. It's that they are feelings, and they are subjective, of course, and they are real. But the cause of a feeling may be misattributed, but the feeling itself is not in question. And because we give meaning to our experiences, meaning can also change. And by meaning, it's like Katy tried to find meaning. What does this really mean? By all this futile search for some cause, some biologic cause mainly. This endless search for finding the Holy Grail.
Do you know, I think that's fascinating to think of fatigue as a feeling rather than an energy deficiency. Can I ask though, I mean, how does this relate to biological findings? For example, changes in mitochondria.
Findings like inflammation, mitochondrial changes may be associated with fatigue, but they are not the feeling itself. They are totally different phenomena. And when these things are mixed up and talking like inflammation is the same as fatigue, then you get in trouble. Actually, I think that is fair to say. I really looked at the literature. No biological factor has been shown to be both necessary and sufficient for the experience of fatigue. There are all kinds of associations, and the research is usually quite poor. And when you try to do it more stringently, then you come out that I think this statement is true. And then, of course, these feelings, we know that without the brain, no feelings. That's self-evident. and the feeling of fatigue has a correlate in the brain in a sort of synchronized activity in a very widespread network. So when you feel fatigue, some activity that is more or less the same in various persons.
I find what you're saying about the science so reassuring, that no biological factor has been shown to be either necessary or sufficient, and that it's not proven to be the cause. I mean, that's so helpful to understand that small associations can be misinterpreted as causes.
Then the question is, how is this network driven to a state that makes you feel fatigue? And then we very easily get onto the biological trail, because we are all familiar with the fatigue occurring during infections like the flu, and therefore it's understandable that when we feel unusually tired without an obvious cause, we ascribe it to something wrong in the body, and we start this search. Nevertheless, we know input from the body is not necessary. We can, for example, experience excruciating pain without any input from pain receptors in the body. And we may feel exhausted without foregoing physical activity, inflammation, or infection, as probably in your case, Louise. Nothing of these things could explain your condition.
So an association that we've learned is that we get fatigue as a response to an infection. But what you're saying is that's not the only possible cause.
Why are we equipped with these rather bothersome sort of alarms, we may call them, pain, fear, and fatigue? That's because they alert us to threats and impending danger. And we know persons born without sense of pain, die early. We need these alarms. And the feeling of fatigue is based on subconscious analysis of cost and benefits by expending energy. So we have a sort of monitor all the time, surveying how we spend our limited sources of energy. And like a fire alarm, our alarms, these are not meant to be ignored. And if you try to ignore them, they tend to gear up rather than calm down. And that I think that is what you have, Louise and Katy, both experienced. When you couldn't change the meaning, you couldn't find any kind of hope of being better, then the alarm went on, and it just, it's not meant to be overlooked.
And I think that's really interesting. And a key point, I guess, for our listeners is that we do need to listen to the alarms or they will continue, but that we may need to interpret those alarms differently.
And if we continue the comparison with the fire alarm, you may note that fire alarm is started by instruction from, we have a smoke detector in the roof. And this smoke detector is very simple, and it acts on the premise that no smoke without fire. Although this is not always true, it's much better, everyone would agree, with 10 false alarms, fire alarms, than one being missed. And our body and our brain system for these alarms work just the same way. It has to be extremely sensitive not to miss any important alarms, and that means that it cannot be specific. It will easily mistake the situation. We accidentally sometimes evoke false alarms. That is the case, I think, for instance, when fatigue does not disappear after an infection is over, like long COVID. In some persons, there may remain some cytokines or whatever for a time, others not. So that is really not an explanation. For some, it's just bad luck that this fire alarm didn't understand what was going on. It didn't understand that healing was going on. You are getting well, everything is going okay. But it was not taken up by this. So
we can actually be healing, but because the alarm system is so sensitive to threats, it's not realizing that.
It may be so that kind of thing where you have a glass that is gradually filled up by your stressful life and other factors. Some of them you knew, some of them not, and then gradually this sort of glass filling your what you can take, what you can cope with, and you cope and you cope and you cope, and then suddenly it overflows, and that then you very easily ascribe the whole thing to the last little thing, which may be rather insignificant. For a school girl failing at not getting the best grade or whatever, but it has been building up for so long.
I think this is key. I mean, certainly the stress glass, or I call it the stress bucket, was really pertinent in my own recovery, and the idea that it can fill up and fill up and fill up and eventually overflow. And I think it's really easy to ascribe a particular event, such as getting a virus, for example, to the illness, when that might have just been the final straw. So how do people get better?
The first thing is to understand the meaning this person gives to the symptoms. And the meaning in this connection is, then you find it by asking questions like, have you hope for ever being better? No, because you have been told this is chronic, there is no cure, we don't know the reason, we have to wait for more research, biologic research, and the best is not to do anything. And have you hope of ever being better? What do you think is the cause of your symptoms that you have been looking for all around, not finding anything, while the symptoms just increase and make you suffering more and more? And one has to be curious and ask with curiosity, and not confronting the patient. And is the cause something completely outside your control? Of course, that is the feeling you have. You're helpless. You have no control. What do you think of the future? What do you think will happen? And of course, in the state you both were in, the future looks very grim because you have no hope.
Oh, so yeah, I mean, meaning and hope. I mean, being told that there is no cure and that you have to wait for a biomedical cure, I mean, that is just soul destroying. And I think it just leaves people feeling both helpless and hopeless.
Many people get well. It may take time. It may require that we talk and that you do something yourself, but there is hope. And without hope, why spend any effort if you have no hope of success? And then comes the problem then that the symptoms, since they are warnings of serious threats, lead to behavior aimed at reducing the suffering, as you were told, both of you, I think, Louise and Katy. You must save your energy. But the problem is not that you have energy, but the alarm system tells you that you are depleted. But actually you have energy. And then you go into a state where you avoid any kind of learning situations because you retract inactivity, seclusion, no sensory stimulation, no movements, because you learn by the hard way that trying to do something, you are punished severely afterwards. And the unlucky thing with this is that then by this restriction of learning opportunities, then you fix your brain networks in this condition and this suffering and this way of coping, because it's a way of coping lying in a dark room without doing anything, and merely thinking of physical challenge may turn on the alarm. The hard thing is that the healing process, and I hope you think you would agree, is a learning and unlearning process. You have to unlearn coping strategies that only serve to prolong the suffering, and you have to learn gradually to get to trust that you can do something without, and the punishment is not that severe, and you may gradually return to, as you have done, both of you, to a normal life, perhaps with some more wisdom in how you spend your your energy.
So if I may recap from the things that you've talked about, things that stand out for me as really key is the fact that if you view fatigue as a feeling, then it can change that entire meaning, because you no longer have to look for a purely biological cause. And as you said, the problem is not that you don't have energy, but that the alarms tell you that you're depleted. But in actual fact, you do have energy. It's just that the alarm is warning of a different threat. But then the problem, as you say, becomes that our behavior gets adapted with this belief in mind, and then you get really stuck with everything. Even the thought of physical activity can start to set off the alarms. And so, in order to get well, we have to unlearn what we've learned as a coping mechanism and do something different. So, I'd love to hear. I mean, let's go to Louise first. I'd love to hear, Louise. I mean, what resonated with you about what Per said about your own journey?
It was that feeling of, you know, when we get unwell, we expect to be able to go to the doctor and for the doctor to help us. And
Mm,
that was the belief that I sort of grew up with. And
mm,
when that doesn't happen, then that's where this kind of sense of hopelessness comes from. Like, well, if there
mm,
isn't an answer, what can I do?
mm.
You know,
Is something wrong with you?
yeah,
You are responsible.
yeah,
Isn't that
yeah,
the
and
kind of
then it's
feeling?
up to me. I've got
Yeah,
to
yeah.
find the answer
Mm,
myself. And so yeah, there's that certain level of hopelessness there, and
mm,
that feeling that some people can't really don't believe you, or
mm,
you can't sort of get that across, and also
mm,
that sense of kind of like punishment because you're working on the evidence that you have in front of you. And so the
mm,
evidence that I had in front of me was when I pushed myself to do things, I
mm,
got such an increase in symptoms that actually it wasn't worth it.
mm,
And so it was a kind of cause and effect. Well, I do this and it gets worse. And so, in the
mm,
absence of any other information, I
mm,
only could work with the evidence in front of me, which was
mm,
activity makes this worse.
mm,
So that then reinforced these beliefs that, well, I
mm,
better not do activity, I better not push myself because that's making me worse. And the sensations were then becoming intolerable. And that's how I got into that pattern of really not pushing myself and trying to pace and trying to sort of maintain this level of kind of, yes, feeling terrible, but not having these big fluctuations where I would really push it, you know, too far and crash really badly. So I could relate to all of that really. Yeah.
and then it's obvious that this is a sort of learning process,
Mm.
a dysfunctional way of coping. And the longer it lasts, the more entrenched it is. And of course, that is an argument for early help.
Katy, what resonated with you in terms of what Per was talking about?
I think what stood out for me was the ignoring of alarms, because I wasn't aware of that at all at the time, and to this day, I have to work very, very, very hard at maintaining the ability to listen and hear the alarms.
Mm,
It's, I mean, I have recently been diagnosed with autism and ADHD, which explains a lot about why I still have to keep learning that. I'm very, very, very disconnected from myself. But I think what you were saying made me think about the fact that for me it wasn't stress in the end, it was my mindset
mm,
um, that was creating the stress. The way my outlook on life,
mm,
the pressures I put on myself,
mm,
that it was a constant life of shoulds and perfectionism. I see that now. But what's so interesting is how long it takes people to connect with themselves and hear those alarms.
mm,
Um, for me, it took such a long time to really nail that down, how to do that.
mm,
Um, because you have to do it in multiple ways, you know, the work alarms, the day-to-day life alarms. There's so
mm.
many alarms that you need to be thinking about, and the different ways in which your body responds.
Jake, how do you work with people to recognize those alarms? And I guess also sometimes the alarms, when do we know whether they're false or real and whether to
Mm.
listen and how to listen? There's that question as well. Jake.
Wow. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here. And yeah, some really big and profound questions. I'm going to talk a little bit about my kind of way of working with ME/CFS, long COVID, and other fatigue-related conditions. And hopefully, I might scratch the surface of some of those big questions that would probably warrant their own discussion events in their own right. But I suppose starting off, I would really kind of appreciate Per, thank you for your very helpful explanation. And for sure, my own working understandings of these conditions is basically the same. And it's kind of reassuring to know that, that we're both reading the same literature and the same neuroscience and the same research. So that's where I'm kind of making sense of these conditions as well. And you said something really important, Per, which is it's all about learning, right? So this is a learned response from our nervous system, from our brain. So the big question, of course, becomes how do we go about unlearning this hyper cautious alarm response, right? How do we create the conditions for our brain to update? Well, thanks, of course, to the brain's inherent malleability, its neuroplasticity, we're fortunate to know now what we didn't know, a couple decades ago, that, there is every reason to understand that we can rewire our brain, as strange as that may sound. And in order to do this, we need to have experiences, right? So corrective experiences, right? So we want to help the brain to update its bleak assumptions. And drawing on the current state of research into persistent symptoms and a new generation of therapies, neuroplastic recovery therapies, I'm going to suggest that there are maybe 8 main types of corrective experience, which I'm calling the pillars of recovery. And actually, I'm going to try and quickly share my screen just to give you some kind of reference for the pillars of recovery I'm talking about. Is that visible?
Yeah.
Okay. Lovely. Okay. So the first pillar may be more important for some than others. I noted that Louise, when she described her experience, she started, more maybe tired but wired, semi-functional, but then she found herself in this awful, much more severe kind of disabling state of fatigue. So for those of us who do find ourselves in the dire depths of severe fatigue, really the first step has to be, in my experience, a degree of kind of calming the nervous system in order to allow our brain to learn that it is safe to kind of to come out of the depth of that shutdown response. And perversely, it might even be a sign of progress that we might return to that more tired but wired state. So really, what this looks like is going to be different for everyone because we all have different nervous systems, but essentially anything that helps us feel safe and connected can be highly regulating. For some people, it might be forms of breath work or meditation. For other people, it might be stroking their pet. So whatever helps us feel safe. And the next pillar really builds on a lot of the discussion so far and what Per had said, especially about the meaning we attribute to symptoms, right? So we need to learn more about our illness to gain more of a coherent understanding of what's going on in our bodies. And in particular, we need to move away from these bleak and really misinformed narratives about what's going on, even if they're well-intentioned. They may be from healthcare professionals, they may be on social media, they may be in society at large, and we need to replace them. So we need to shift from a perspective of my body is broken and nobody can help me, to my brain and body are dysregulated, but there are things that I can do to reverse this, right? And again, because the brain, what we now know from neuroscience, because the brain is a predictive machine, even this knowledge is going to help the brain update its outlook in terms of its ability to keep the body in balance. And the next pillar then is to use this knowledge of neuroplastic symptoms to start responding to the symptoms themselves in a new and more flexible way. So we want to start, or rather we want to stop responding to our symptoms with what Howard Schubiner describes as the 5 Fs. So living in fear of them, focusing on them all the time, trying to fix them, feeling frustrated with them, and trying to fight them. In other words, we want to stop pouring petrol on the fire of the fear symptom cycle, in which we inadvertently cause the brain to amplify symptoms by sending it messages of threat and danger, and conversely, we want to start responding curiously and flexibly in the knowledge that we are safe, that there's nothing irrevocably wrong with our body, that really what's going on is, as Per has described, it's an alarm or warning signal failure from the brain. And there are some wonderful practices. So there's something called somatic tracking from an evidence-based therapy called pain reprocessing therapy, which we can do regularly. So it can be a gradual corrective experience, but it can be very powerful. And the next pillar is to gradually and gently start to move back into the world. So this is, very experientially nudging the brain to learn that maybe it is safe after all for us to do a little bit more than it expects us to be able to do. And not purely physical exertion, but also just exposure to situations or even emotions that we can handle this. We do have the capacity. So it has to be very compassionate and very gradual, listening to our bodies, not overriding the signals or not kind of invalidating them. It's such a balancing act. I would say it's an art as much as a science. The next pillar is to learn to notice, feel, and honor our emotions. So I really appreciate that Per had said that had said that fatigue is a feeling, and emotions, of course, are feelings, right? They are messages just as much as what we would call symptoms sent to us by our brain, telling us that something's happening that is important to our continued survival and thriving. So unfortunately, some of us have learned for various reasons to kind of suppress or disconnect from our emotions. And as such, learning to tune back into, to name, to fully feel and honor our emotions can itself be a really important corrective experience for the brain. It's a bit like we're sending a message back to the brain if we've been ignoring these emotions for the longest time, saying, okay, I'm listening now, I'm receiving these messages and I'm appreciating the wisdom there. I'm going to honor them, I'm going to act on them, right? So that's really helping the brain kind of feel a bit more confident in its ability to balance our body. And then another pillar is to look at personality traits. It may not apply to every single person, but there is a disproportionate number of us who have these conditions or recovered from them, who could probably identify with a whole bunch of personality traits like perfectionism, people-pleasing, hyper-responsibility, self-sacrifice, a high drive to achieve, and a strong aversion to letting other people down. So by learning to meet the world in a much more flexible and sustainable way that doesn't connect us from our core needs, again, we're sending all these lovely corrective messages back to the brain that, okay, we're going to do things differently now. We're listening to you. We are looking for a much greater degree of coherence and harmony between the brain and the body. Another pillar for some people is maybe to look at doing some trauma-focused therapy. And so for many people, not everyone for sure, but many people have experienced things in their life that were overwhelming and that they may not have had the chance to fully process and to integrate. And so again, naturally, it's going to be another important corrective experience for those people to update the brain, to really learn that the threat of that traumatic experience has passed, that we're safe now, and that it's no longer necessary to gear up the nervous, the neuroendocrine, the immune systems to constantly brace for threat. And then finally, many people, the research says, many people with fatigue-related conditions are disproportionately impacted by, or rather are neurodivergent, living with neurodivergent profiles like ADHD and being autistic. And obviously Katy just described her own experiences, very apt as well. Thank you for sharing. And it does start to make sense if we think, and Katy actually described this very profoundly, I felt like it's very common with neurodivergence to have differences, right? And how people process not only the world outside them through the five senses, but the world inside of them through interoception, the inner sense. So, in addition to that, there's also the stresses of being neurodivergent in a neuronormative world. So, with that being said, anything we can do to help regulate our unique nervous systems by tapping into our own particular sensory profiles and accessing, all sorts of support to navigate the more systemic barriers to our functioning and thriving is also going to be highly corrective. So there we have it. Yeah, I hope that speaks to some of your questions, even if it doesn't answer them completely.
Thank you very much. I think you've touched on all the different traits and that I see. I recognise, I mean, particularly for my recovery, responding to symptoms differently and viewing them differently. And I understand now, Per, when you talk about fatigue being a feeling, but being different from perception. If you can change your perception and the meaning, then you can have the same feeling, but respond very differently. Louise, I'd love to maybe stop sharing so we can see
Yeah.
people, but I'm really interested, Louise, what out of those 8 pillars and what Jake has talked about, and I know, in your own right, you're also a mind body coach. What stands out for you? And also, what was the kind of turning points, or what were the key things that helped your recovery?
Yeah, for me, the one of the main standout points is the emotional regulation and the interoception. And similar to Katy, when I look at, and Per was talking about the alarm system. When I look at the alarm system, I now have, on the other side of recovery and now being a practitioner, this real understanding of what was it that switched the alarm system on for me and what was actually keeping it switched on. And for me, there was, everything on this that Jake shared was relevant. But for me, there was this real sense of when I was younger, and there's neurodivergence, I'm neurodivergent as well. And there was this sense of, really feeling rejection strongly, really trying to avoid, like I felt, it wasn't that I couldn't feel it, but I had such big feelings. So I would avoid those experiences, which were very painful and difficult, by pushing those feelings down and making myself smaller. And over time, that really, we know, I work a lot with emotional awareness and expression therapy and other evidence-based technique, but it's understanding that over time, as we're suppressing these emotions, they're actually creating stress within the body, internalized stress, which is then, switching our alarm on. And so that internal alarm signal was switched on through these years and years of like pleasing and avoiding these emotions. And then when I found myself in a stressful life, stressful job, unhappy marriage, financial strains, these alarms were going off. And this was like a really powerful signal that was saying to me, right, Louise, you need to take some action here. There's something going on here. And of course, as Katy said, I wasn't recognizing those kind of signals, and I was pushing through. So a real turning point for me was understanding that, and understanding actually this thing about fatigue being switched on as this alarm signal, and then how I was then responding to that. So education was really important for me, working out what was actually happening. It made a lot of sense to me. And then I would notice that how I responded to symptoms when they arose. Like I had this relationship with my body where a symptom would arise and I would disconnect further, because I would be in those 5 F's you talked about, Jake, the fixing and the fear and the frustration and the trying to figure it out. And I started somatic tracking, so that when I felt fatigued, instead of all of that, I actually worked with my brain and I thought, okay, this is an alarm signal. And so I really used visualization to visualize switching that alarm off. And that was really what began to kind of change my experience of fatigue. It was absolutely incredible. And then that gave me that little bit of evidence that there might be something in this, because I was quite skeptical, in fact. I'd spent 8 years fighting for this to be a biological illness, and then I needed that evidence that this was working. And when that started to turn around, it was like, what? This is actually it was like, oops, you know, this is going to work. And so there was that element, understanding, you know, coming back into relationship with my emotions was really important as well, and starting that emotional expression, you know, taking off the mask. I had years of unprocessed emotion, you know, trauma, masking to uncover, and that was actually a really difficult time, was uncovering all of that and processing it through. It was a dark time for me, but actually on the other side of that was this beautiful relationship that I then built up with my body, where I was having a conversation with it, I was in relationship with it, I wasn't afraid of it, and really I was listening to those messages, and I was responding in a way that wasn't fearful. And I was getting my life back. And so there was really that mixture of, you know, the education, understanding what was going on, starting to learn emotional expression and regulation. Just turning around the way that I was relating to my body. And then all those things that I'd been linking together, like, well, if I walk, that gives me post-exertional malaise. My brain was making connections all over the place. And so I started to break those connections. Like, I used to give myself a little kind of safety sandwich. So I would do like a safe space meditation, and then I would go for a walk, and then I would come back and I would do a little bit of brain retraining. And slowly I was changing my brain's opinion that walking was unsafe. And I went from using my wheelchair to like just going for walks. And it was just this incredible, like, how could I change my brain's mind in that way? You know, it was just like kind of exponentially grew. Yeah.
Louise, that is amazing. And do you class yourself as fully recovered
Yes.
now?
My
Wow.
body still speaks to me, but I think that's a lovely thing. There's like this level of conversation. So I work full time. I'm very, very active. I travel a lot. There's nothing really. I go to the gym. There's nothing really that I'm restricted from doing. But when I feel stressed, then I get these, you know, little flags from my body, and actually they're really useful because, like Katy, I don't always have that. You know, I don't always recognize those signals, and so my body knows that I need something more of a signal there. So I get these little flags that are actually really handy. They're really helpful for me because that shows me, oh, there might be something emotional going on here. And then I'll do a little bit of journaling. I'm big into somatic movement, and I can help my body to release some of that kind of internalized, particularly with, you know, ADHD and things. It's that internalized stress that needs that outlet. So yeah, I think they're really handy little pointers from my body that I do actually need and value, but they're certainly not interpreted as symptoms. And yeah, I'm fully well.
Amazing. And it sounds like what's changed is the interpretation, the meaning that you're putting on any signals has changed, and that changes then everything. Katy, what about yourself? What going back to some of the 8 pillars that Jake talks about, what resonated with you that maybe helped your recovery?
Well, I would say every single pillar was something I needed. I think you would have had to force me through it because I wouldn't have believed it, but every single pillar in the end would have been something I needed help with. In the end, I did the lightning process, which was great for teaching me that I had some power here, I had some control, and giving me an idea of why, I guess, with no real depth, but a sense of potentially why I had become sick. But what the lightning process doesn't do, and I don't want to, it works wonderfully for so many people, but what it didn't do was it really teach me why I got sick, help me connect with emotions. there's a lot left out that I desperately needed. And so even though I recovered for a while from the lightning process, I got sick again. And I ended up relapsing with chronic fatigue syndrome. And so I had so much learning that I had to go away and do on my own, because at that point I wasn't able to find any coaches, programs. There wasn't anything I could find out there that could help. So I kind of traversed the space by myself, picking up puzzle pieces as I went. But I completely identified with every single word that Louise said, like every single word. And it was quite emotional hearing something so similar being spoken by someone else. And now, having done the work to connect emotionally, I agree, Louise, that is such a beautiful relationship that you create, that I can almost joke now with my body and have a little, like, I smile when I have a conversation with my body. And what an amazing gift, because so many people, whether they get sick or not, never learn that in the modern, Western world. And so nowadays I do, my alarm does have to scream at me. I mean, the signals from my body, they have to be screaming. It knows that, and it hasn't changed that, because it absolutely knows me. I will not hear, because I will be so in my head. And so I'll suddenly be like, oh, okay, I'm being screamed at, so I better check in and tune in. And so what I do nowadays is inner child work as an immediate, very rapid, convenient way to kind of check in with myself and how I'm feeling. Alongside my autism, I have something that's called alexithymia, which means I can't really identify emotions. I can't label them. I can't really explain how they feel. Very, very disconnected to my emotions. And inner child work is this amazing thing where I kind of I imagine talking to this young version of myself, and I'm saying, how are you feeling? And then I might just start crying, and I'll go, oh, okay, I'm sad. I can't work that out unless I use that practice. But it's just such a wonderful technique. And I know people find so many similar techniques that work for them, like Louise, you were talking about somatic practices. But the ways in which we create that relationship with our body it's such a beautiful gift. And I'm so thankful that I had to learn that, to be honest with you.
Wow. And thank you so much for sharing. We are almost out of time. I would love to just go round and just ask each person on our panel, if there's like one piece of advice for someone coming in that's just, being diagnosed, that's at the start of their journey. What, one piece of advice would you give? I realise I'm just asking probably a big question, but Jake, you're nodding. What advice would you give to someone at the start of their journey that might help? And then I'll come to Per, and then finish with Katy and Louise.
Yeah, that's such an important question. And you took me back in time to when I was at the start of my journey and feeling totally overwhelmed and confused and terrified, and having come across some really bleak statistics and prognoses and all the rest of it. So I guess by virtue of the fact that you're asking me on this video, I'd say to whoever's watching out there, carry on following this kind of content, and do yourself a favor and give yourself permission to be incredibly boundaried about the what you engage in. Social media can be both wonderful and terrible, right? So just know that the tide is changing, and that there's a ton of exciting neuroscience and psychoneuroimmunological research, and the fact that, come on, we got Per Brodal, who's written the textbook on neuroanatomy, on the central nervous system, who's here explaining things in a very understandable way. This is not quackery. This is not woo-woo. This is legit. And those who are still hoping for purely biomedical explanation. Nothing against them, totally understandable. I've been there, but just know that there are many illnesses that are purely biomedical, and we do have to learn just to accept this is not one of them.
Yeah, Jake, when you were saying that, it reminded me, I think it's Dan Buglio, he says, get out of the bad neighborhoods. What you
Yeah,
yourself and prime yourself with
yeah.
makes a difference. Per, if you were to give, Louise and Katy at the start of their journey one piece of advice, what would it be?
No, I don't think my I think it is not advice. Advice is we just don't like to get advice, most of us. I think the first thing is acceptance and curiosity of you as a person. For instance, finding out, Katy, that she has certain vulnerabilities or ways of as with autism, which may be strengths but also weaknesses, making some things more difficult, and get all these things up, and so you know each other, and then getting a relationship, and when this and I think also in the process then probably of sorting out, and perhaps for the first time being able to talk about how you really feel, not only that you are fatigued, but other things that are related to it, which may be very personal and sensitive, and really requires that there is a trustful relationship. Then things starts moving, and your brain plasticity is you are starting to learn during that process. And some people say that even before they come to the first session of the lightning process, they are almost cured, because there has been a long process in advance. So I think my feeling is that if we could teach doctors to understand that body and soul or mind are so interconnected. And we know, for instance, that if you're going to help a cancer patient with pain, most people will say this is purely somatic, then you are a very bad position. If you don't understand also the emotional and the cognitive and the alarm system, all these things, then you can help them. But if you don't, and if you use in a post-operative ward, if you just pour out with opioids, no pain is really, it doesn't help at all until you talk to the patient and make them understand the situation and get hope and get the fear away. Then suddenly the opioids work. So these are I mean, you may say that fatigue or chronic fatigue illness or disease, it's purely a mental thing. It's not, because as you speak also, it also involves your whole body, and you have to take both into consideration, as you have with any somatic disease, actually. So the difference isn't that big. So it's a way of thinking of humans as whole beings, being both mental and body, and these things. I mean, in a way, this is so self-evident, but it's so overlooked often in therapeutic relations, unfortunately.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. The getting to know yourself seems to be absolutely key. Louise, Katy, anything to add in terms of anything else that you wished you'd known at the start of your journeys?
Yeah, maybe not so much something well, yeah, for me, there's something there around, these ideas might be completely different from how you have previously thought of your body and your health. And there's a lot of stigma out there, so that we feel sometimes like we're being told these symptoms aren't real or they're in your head. And I suppose for me, there's something here about, you know, it is going to be, it could be like it was very challenging for me to get my head around that. And so it could be that this goes against what you already believe about how your body works. And so I guess there's something there about like let yourself be a learner, let yourself, support yourself to be able to challenge some of those ideas that you've held previously. Like Jake said, this isn't woo woo, it's real. We're more than tissues and cells and bones and organs. We are spirit, we're mind, we're, heart, we're soul, we're all of these things. And so, there's something there around, yes, this might be, challenging for like for me, it was my whole belief system about, how everything worked was just like turned upside down. And I was like, what do you mean? So yeah, just holding yourself in there and in that, and allowing yourself to learn. And if you need some help, you know, that's okay. Find a coach, find a group, find a peer. Just, we don't have to do this on our own anymore. And Katy and I both did this, I think, mostly on our own. And I was very fortunate to have a friend on the same path who really helped me, Fiona. But you don't have to. And yeah, let yourself be like, what? Because it is quite, yeah, quite a lot.
Yeah, and as Jake said, the tide is turning, and there are more and more people having these experiences, but coming out the other end. Katy, last word for you before we wrap up.
I was just going to say, very similar to Louise, that my advice to someone starting out, especially if they were unsure, is go away and learn the mind body science first. Take all that doubt away. It's just in the way of you getting anywhere. Let's deal with that first. So whether that's going to someone like Louise or Jake, or reading Per's paper, there's also amazing resources out there. Jan Rothney's book Breaking Through is a wonderful resource for just learning about why you got sick and that mind-body connection. I mean, the term psychosomatic is so triggering for people, but it just means mind-body. It doesn't mean, no one's saying that you have imagined symptoms into being. So try and learn how to remove that thinking. And yes, Louise, I also have my website, the Recovery Hub, which is a resource. The aim of it is to make recovery more accessible. There's a list of an almost exhaustive list of recovery programs that are out there. There's books, there's podcasts, YouTube channels. So if you're struggling to find resources, there's a lot on there, and there'll be way more being added as time goes on.
Thank you so much. And we'll pop all of that into the show notes as well. And my fatigue actually went very quickly, just with an explanation. That was it. I listened to this explanation, and then a few days later, I realised that I'd literally just come out of the fatigue tunnel. So it can be quite quick, I think, if you're prepared to really kind of be open-minded. Thank you so much. It has been an honour. We will be posting this on our YouTube channel, which is Fatigue Science Talks. And I so appreciate all of you and the time that you've spent tonight with me. Thank you.